Ladies and gentlemen, .it is both an honor and a privilege to speak to you today on a subject that is integral to the very fabric of governance, the balance between power and responsibility in political leadership. Throughout history, the concepts of power and leadership have been intertwined, shaping the destinies of nations, economies, and the social order. Yet, the true measure of political leadership is not found solely in the authority one holds, but in the responsibility with which that authority is exercised. Political power is a force of immense potential. It is the ability to create policies, enact laws, shape cultures, and influence the direction of society. Power can inspire hope, build infrastructures of progress, and safeguard human dignity. However, unchecked or misused power can also destroy nations, deepen inequality, and erode the trust between government and the governed. It is in this space reflect on the nature of leadership, we must recognize that power responsibility in and of itself is neutral. It is a tool, much like a hammer or a pen. It can be used to build bridges or tear down walls, to protect or to oppress. What gives power its character, whether it becomes an instrument of justice or an agent of tyranny, depends entirely on how it is wielded. This is where responsibility enters the conversation. Responsibility is the guiding principle that tempers power, shaping it into something that serves rather than subjugates. Leaders in politics are entrusted with a significant amount of power. But this trust is not a blank check to use power as they see fit. Instead, it comes with an implicit contract. Leaders must act in the best interests of the people they serve. This means that every decision, every action, every policy must be weighed against the impact it would have on the citizens, particularly those who are most vulnerable. The temptations that come with power are well documented. History offers us countless examples of leaders who have allowed their pursuit of power to overshadow their sense of responsibility. Dictatorships, authoritarian regimes, and corrupt governments often begin with leaders who initially seem to have good intentions but lost sight of their duty to the people. The seductive nature of power lies in its ability to make those who hold it believe that they are infallible, that they are above the rules that govern others. This is why we must remain vigilant and why systems of checks and balances are critical in any political system. No leader, no matter how capable or well-meaning, should be allowed to hold absolute power without accountability. Power without responsibility becomes dangerous, not only to a leader's integrity, on the other hand, the very foundation is the moral compass that guides leadership. It is what ensures that power is used not for personal gain or political expedience, but for the greater good of society. True political leadership requires a deep sense of responsibility, a recognition that one's decisions impact lives, shape futures, and define the course of history. A responsible leader does not act out of impulse or self-interest. They are guided by principles of fairness, justice, and equity. They seek out the opinions of others, especially those who may disagree with them. And they prioritize the needs of the people over the demands of political expediency. Responsibility means being accountable for one's actions, owning both the successes and the failures. It is also crucial understanding that leadership is not about exerting control, but about serving a cause greater than oneself. It requires leaders to build systems that prevent the abuse of power. This includes establishing transparent institutions, supporting a free press, and upholding the rule of law. These are the pillars of democratic governance, and they ensure that power remains accountable to the people. The complexity of balancing power and responsibility, the balance between power and responsibility, is not a simple equation. It requires constant vigilance, self-awareness, and humility. Political leaders are often faced with complex challenges that demand decisive action, sometimes in the face of incomplete information or in moments of crisis where there is little time for reflection. In these moments, the pressure to act can be immense and the stakes can be incredibly high. But even in times of crisis, perhaps especially in times of crisis, leaders must ground their decisions in a sense of responsibility to the public. Consider the global crises that have tested political leadership in recent times: the COVID-19 pandemic, climate change, geopolitical conflicts, and economic instability. Each of these issues requires leaders to wield power with precision, to make tough decisions that will inevitably affect millions of people. Yet the greatest test of leadership in these moments is not only how quickly decisions are made, but how thoughtfully they are weighed. Leaders must balance the urgency of action with the long-term consequences of their policies. They must be bold, but also prudent, decisive, but compassionate. Leadership with humility. Humility is an essential quality for any leader who seeks to balance power and responsibility. Leaders must recognize that they are not infallible, that they cannot always be right, and that their authority is granted by the people they serve. Humility reminds leaders that their power is not an end in itself, but a means to uplift others and create a better society. It also reminds them that true leadership is not about accumulating power, but about empowering others. A humble leader listens to diverse perspectives, values collaboration over command, and is willing to admit mistakes. This kind of leader understands that no single person holds all the answers, and that the strength of a nation comes from the collective wisdom of its people. They recognize that leadership is about more than making decisions. It is about creating opportunities for others to lead, to contribute, and to thrive. The legacy of balanced leadership. At the end of the day, political leadership is not measured by how much power one accumulates, but by how responsibly that power is used to bring about positive change. The legacy of a leader is not written in the size of their office or the number of policies they pass, but in the lives they improve, the justice they deliver, and the trust they build between government and the people. We must ask ourselves, what kind of leaders do we want to follow? And what kind of leaders do we want to become? Do we value power for its own sake, or do we value leaders who understand that with great power comes even greater responsibility? History will remember the leaders who, in moments of great challenge, chose responsibility over recklessness, service over self-interest, and unity over division. In conclusion, the balance between power and responsibility is the hallmark of true political leadership. It is not an easy balance to strike, but it is one that we must strive for if we are to build just, equitable, and prosperous societies. Let us encourage and support leaders who understand this balance, who wield their power with wisdom and compassion, and who embrace the responsibility to serve the common good. I invite you to delve into a subject that has been central to the evolution of human governance, leadership, and societal progress throughout history: the dual nature of power. Power, by its very essence, is a force that shapes nations, influences millions, and determines the direction of our collective future. It is a phenomenon that has inspired both awe and fear, depending on how it has been applied. For while power holds the potential to be an instrument of remarkable progress, it also has the capacity to be a vehicle of devastating oppression. Power is the ability to influence, control, and direct the behavior of others or the course of events. Whether wielded in the political, economic, social, or personal realms, power is sought after by leaders who seek to create change, shape policy, and realize their vision for a better future. Yet, while power can be a force for good, it also carries the risk of being misused, with consequences that can destabilize societies and perpetuate injustice. In this discussion, we must recognize that power by itself is neutral. It is neither inherently good nor bad. It is a tool. Like fire, it can warm and protect, or it can burn and destroy. What defines power is how it is used, and this is where the duality of power comes into play. Power can be a source of liberation, justice, and innovation, but it can also lead to tyranny, corruption, and fear. It is this tension between power's potential for progress and its propensity for oppression that we must explore, so that we may better understand how to cultivate ethical leadership and safeguard against the abuse of power. When we think of power as a tool for progress, we are reminded of the leaders throughout history who have used their authority to uplift their nations, protect human dignity, and drive social and economic advancement. These are the individuals who saw power as a responsibility, not a privilege, and who recognized that their role was to serve the people rather than to dominate them. Leaders such as Nelson Mandela, who fought against apartheid in South Africa, and Franklin D. Roosevelt, who guided the United States through the Great Depression, exemplify how power, when guided by a strong moral compass, can be used to build societies where equality, opportunity, and justice prevail. Such leaders wielded their power not for personal gain, but for the greater good. They understood that power could be a tool to advance the rights of the marginalized, to enact reforms that benefit society as a whole, and to inspire collective action towards shared goals. In the hands of these leaders, power was a transformative force. capable of uplifting entire generations. It fostered innovation, improved access to education, healthcare, and economic opportunities. This form of power is not about control or coercion, but about empowerment. It is about creating systems that allow individuals to reach their full potential and participate meaningfully in the life of their communities. It is about giving voice to the voiceless, advocating for the disenfranchised, and ensuring that justice is not a privilege reserved for the few, but a right available to all. When power is used in this way, it becomes a catalyst for progress, allowing societies to grow and evolve in ways that benefit everyone, not just those in positions of authority. However, as history has shown us time and time again, power also has a darker side. When it is unchecked, when it is concentrated in the hands of a few, and when it is used to serve selfish interests rather than the common good, power becomes a tool of oppression. In this form, power does not uplift, it suppresses. It does not inspire, it instills fear. And rather than fostering justice, it perpetuates inequality and division. This darker side of power is often driven by ego, greed, and the desire to maintain control at all costs. It is the power of dictators, tyrants, and authoritarian regimes who exploit their authority to silence dissent, marginalize minorities, and entrench their rule. These leaders are not interested in serving the people. Their primary concern is maintaining their hold on power, even if it means violating human rights, undermining democratic institutions, or resorting to violence and intimidation. The examples of power being used for oppression are all too familiar. Throughout history, we have seen leaders who, consumed by their lust for control, have inflicted immense suffering on their populations. Consider the horrors of Nazi Germany, where Adolf Hitler used his power to systematically dehumanize and exterminate millions of people in pursuit of a twisted ideology. Or look at the apartheid regime in South Africa, where political power was used to institutionalize racial discrimination and segregation, denying basic human rights to the majority of the population. These regimes and others like them serve as stark reminders of the dangers of unchecked power. When power is used to oppress, it erodes the very foundations of society. It destroys trust between citizens and their leaders, creating an environment of fear and suspicion. It fosters inequality, where a small elite enjoys immense privilege while the vast majority suffers. And it leads to a breakdown in social cohesion as people become divided along lines of race, class, ethnicity. Oppression through power does not always take such extreme forms, but it can be equally insidious when it manifests as corruption, cronyism, or the suppression of dissent. Leaders who use their authority to enrich themselves, protect their inner circles, or stifle freedom of speech and the press are also guilty of abusing power. In these cases, the harm may not be as visible or as immediate, but over time, it corrodes the democratic fabric of society, undermining the very principles of fairness, equality, and justice that power is meant to uphold. Given the dual nature of power, the question we must ask ourselves is this: how can we ensure that power is used for progress, not oppression? How can we encourage leaders to wield their authority responsibly? And what safeguards can we put in place to prevent the abuse of power? The answer lies in accountability. Power without accountability is dangerous. And this is why checks and balances are so crucial in any political system. No leader, no matter how virtuous or well-intentioned, should be allowed to wield absolute power without oversight. Institutions such as independent judiciaries, free and fair elections, a free press, and civil society organizations all play a vital role in holding power to account. These institutions ensure that leaders are answerable to the people they serve and that abuses of power are exposed and corrected. Furthermore, it is essential that leaders themselves understand the responsibility that comes with power. True leadership requires humility. It requires a recognition that power is not something to be hoarded, but something to be shared. Leaders must understand that their authority comes from the people and that they have a duty to use that authority for the common good. They must be willing to listen to the voices of their constituents, to engage in dialogue, and to make decisions that reflect the interests of the many, not the few. This is not an easy task, and it requires a deep commitment to ethical leadership. Leaders must resist the temptation to use power for personal gain or to manipulate others for political advantage. They must be guided by principles of justice, fairness, and equality, and they must always keep in mind that the true measure of their leadership is not how much power they have, but how responsibly they use it. Power is a double-edged sword. It has the potential to be a force for extraordinary progress or a tool of devastating oppression. It is up to us as citizens to demand that our leaders use their power for good. It is up to our institutions to hold power accountable. And it is up to leaders themselves to recognize the responsibility that comes with their authority. If we are to build a just, equitable, and prosperous world, we must ensure that power is used to uplift, not oppress to serve, not dominate and to unite, not divide. In doing so, we can unlock the full potential of power as a force for progress, while safeguarding against its capacity for harm. It is an honor to stand before you today and speak on a topic that lies at the very heart of political governance and leadership, the moral imperative of responsibility in political leadership. In our increasingly interconnected world, where the decisions made by those in power ripple across nations and affect the lives of millions, the need for responsible leadership has never been more crucial. Political leadership is more than the pursuit of power or the implementation of policies. It is a profound moral calling and ethical responsibility that transcends the mechanics of governance. It requires not only vision, intelligence, and decisiveness, but also a deep, unwavering commitment to the people a leader serves. At its core, political leadership is about responsibility, a responsibility to act in the best interests of the nation, to uphold principles of justice, fairness, and equity, and to use power for the common good, not personal gain. When we speak of responsibility in political leadership, we refer to more than just accountability. Responsibility is the moral duty that comes with the privilege of holding power. It is the obligation to consider how every decision impacts not only the current generation, but also future ones. It is the commitment to act with integrity, even when doing so may be difficult or unpopular. Responsibility is the anchor that keeps power from becoming corrupt, decisions from becoming self-serving, and governance from descending into chaos. Without responsibility, political leadership loses its ethical core, and with it, the trust of the people. To truly understand the significance of responsibility in political leadership, we must first recognize the nature of political power itself. Power is the ability to influence or control the actions and decisions of others. In politics, this power is immense. It grants leaders the authority to create laws, allocate resources, and shape the direction of society. But power, as history has shown us, is a double-edged sword. When wielded with responsibility, it can be a force for good, fostering societal progress, protecting human rights, and expanding opportunities for all. However, when power is used irresponsibly, it can lead to corruption, oppression, and the erosion of the very values upon which society is built. Responsibility is what tempers the use of power. It ensures that leaders remain grounded, mindful of the impact their decisions will have on the most vulnerable members of society. Responsible leaders recognize that every choice they make has consequences that extend far beyond the immediate moment. For instance, a policy that benefits the wealthy at the expense of the poor may yield short-term economic gains, but will ultimately deepen inequality and undermine social cohesion. A decision to prioritize political expediency over environmental sustainability may secure votes today, but will leave future generations grappling with the devastating effects of climate change. True responsibility in leadership requires thinking beyond the present and making decisions that honor the long-term well-being of society. Political leadership is a profound sense of duty to the people. Political leaders are entrusted with the welfare of their citizens, and this trust demands that they act with honesty, transparency, and empathy. Leaders must be willing to put the needs of the many above their own interests. This means being accountable for one's actions, owning up to mistakes, and correcting course when necessary. It means fostering an environment where dissenting voices are heard, where diverse perspectives are considered, and where the needs of marginalized communities are addressed. We have seen too many examples of leaders who have failed to meet this moral imperative. Leaders who have allowed their personal ambitions to overshadow their duty to the people. Leaders who have prioritized political survival over the well-being of their citizens. In such cases, power becomes a tool for self-preservation and responsibility is cast aside. The results are often devastating broken systems, disenfranchised populations, and a loss of public trust in the institutions of governance. This loss of trust is perhaps the greatest casualty of irresponsible leadership. Once trust is eroded, it is difficult to rebuild. Citizens become cynical, disengaged, and disillusioned with the political process. Democracy itself suffers when the people no longer believe that their leaders are acting in their best interests. This is why responsible leadership is so vital. It is the glue that holds the social contract together. When leaders act responsibly, they build trust with their citizens. They create an environment where people feel heard, valued, and represented. They ensure that governance is a collaborative effort, one in which the voices of the people guide the direction of policy. Moreover, responsible leadership is not only about doing what is right in the eyes of the law, but also doing what is morally just. It requires a commitment to fairness and equity, ensuring that no group is left behind or unfairly disadvantaged. Responsible leaders strive to reduce inequality, protect the vulnerable, and create opportunities for all. They understand that the true measure of leadership is not how much power they hold, but how that power is used to uplift and empower others. In today's world, the need for responsible political leadership has never been more urgent. We face complex global challenges, climate change, economic inequality, political polarization, and social injustice, to name a few. These challenges require leaders who are not only capable of making tough decisions, but also leaders who are guided by a strong sense of responsibility to the common good. Leaders who understand that their role is not to serve themselves or their political allies, but to serve humanity as a whole. It is a great privilege to speak to you today on a subject that has defined the course of human history and continues to shape our present and future: the consequences of unchecked power. Power, as we know, is the driving force behind leadership, governance, and social order. It is a tool that has been wielded throughout the centuries to achieve great advancements, from building nations to defending human rights and sparking innovation. Yet power is a double-edged sword, and when left unchecked, it becomes a destructive force, eroding the very foundations of justice, power freedom, is one of the gravest dangers to any society. It allows authority to exist without restraint, without accountability, and without regard for the moral or legal frameworks that ensure fairness and justice. When those in power are not subject to limits or oversight, the consequences are often devastating. The unchecked exercise of power leads to tyranny, corruption, oppression, and the breakdown of societal trust. It undermines the democratic principles that ensure freedom and equal representation for all. This is not just a lesson from history, but a reality. Let us begin by considering the seductive nature of power itself. Power grants individuals and institutions the ability to shape lives, influence decisions, and control resources. It is an enticing force capable of delivering immense benefits when used wisely. However, when power is concentrated in the hands of a few and left without checks or balances, it breeds arrogance and entitlement. Human nature, as history has shown us, is susceptible to corruption when given unchecked power. Leaders, no matter how well-intentioned, are vulnerable to the temptations that come with absolute authority. This is why the notion that absolute power corrupts absolutely resonates so deeply across time. Without the constraints of law, oversight, or public accountability, power morphs from a tool for progress into a weapon of oppression. Throughout history, we have seen how unchecked power has led to some of the darkest chapters in human civilization. Consider the reigns of authoritarian rulers and dictators who, in the absence of any meaningful checks on their authority, committed atrocities and inflicted suffering on their own people. From the brutal reign of Joseph Stalin in the Soviet Union to the horrors of Nazi Germany under Adolf Hitler, unchecked power allowed these leaders to operate without restraint, leading to mass suffering, systemic human rights abuses, and the loss of millions of innocent lives. These regimes, fueled by the unchecked authority of a single leader or an elite few, were built on fear, control, and the suppression of dissent. There was no space for opposition, no room for dialogue, and no mechanism to hold those in power accountable for their actions. Such examples are not limited to the distant past. In our contemporary world, we continue to witness the consequences of unchecked power. Across various regions, authoritarian governments cling to power through manipulation, censorship, and violence, crushing the voices of their people and silencing any form of opposition. In these regimes, the rule of law is often subverted and democratic institutions are either weakened or dismantled altogether. Media freedom is curtailed, human rights are trampled upon, and leaders are free to use the machinery of the state for their personal gain and political survival. The people, in turn, are left powerless, disenfranchised, and in many cases, power leads to corruption, both moral and political. When power is concentrated and not subject to oversight, it becomes easier for those in authority to use their positions for personal enrichment rather than public service. Corruption in this context becomes systemic, affecting not just the leaders themselves, but the very institutions meant to safeguard the public good. Government contracts are awarded not based on merit, but on favoritism. Public resources are siphoned off to benefit a select few, while the majority of the population struggles with poverty, inadequate health care, and failing infrastructure. The rule of law is replaced by the rule of the powerful, creating a system where justice is inaccessible to ordinary citizens. Corruption undermines faith in government, creates widespread inequality, and ultimately destroys the trust that binds society together. The consequences of unchecked power extend beyond the political realm and seep into the very fabric of society. When leaders are not held accountable, it fosters a culture of impunity, where the privileged few are able to act with disregard for the rules that govern everyone else. This sense of impunity spreads, infecting institutions and corrupting values. In such an environment, the line between right and wrong becomes blurred. Laws are bent to serve the interests of the powerful, and ethics become secondary to the pursuit of control. Citizens witnessing this degradation become disillusioned with their governments and leaders, leading to widespread cynicism, apathy, and disengagement from the political process. This erosion of trust between the governed and those in power weakens the very foundations of democracy and social cohesion. Unchecked power also stifles innovation, progress, and freedom. In environments where power is concentrated in the hands of the few and dissent is not tolerated, creativity and critical thinking are often suppressed. People are afraid to challenge the status quo, fearing repercussions from those in power. In such societies, progress stagnates as the free exchange of ideas and the ability to question and innovate are replaced by conformity and fear. In contrast, societies that have established strong checks on power, such as robust democratic institutions and a free press, thrive because they allow for open dialogue, debate, and the exchange of ideas. These societies are able to innovate, progress, and respond to the challenges of the future because power is shared, not hoarded. At the heart of the dangers posed by unchecked accountability is woven into the fabric of governance. When power is concentrated in the hands of a few, the rights and freedoms of the many are often trampled upon. People become pawns in the political games of those in authority, stripped of their agency and treated as mere subjects rather than citizens with inherent rights. In authoritarian regimes, this manifests as widespread human rights abuses, from arbitrary arrests and torture to censorship and the suppression of free speech. The absence of checks on power enables these abuses to continue unchecked, as there is no mechanism to challenge or expose them. People are left voiceless, powerless to resist or demand justice. Yet, the story of unchecked power is not without hope. History also teaches us that the antidote to unchecked power lies in strong democratic institutions, a vibrant civil society, and an informed and engaged citizenry. The systems that allow for power to be checked, such as independent judiciaries, free and fair elections, a free press, and the rule of law, are the safeguards that protect against tyranny and ensure that leaders remain accountable to the people they serve. These checks and balances are not mere bureaucratic obstacles, they are the lifeblood of democracy. They ensure that power is exercised responsibly, ethically, and for the public good. Unchecked power is one of the gravest threats to freedom, justice, and human dignity. It allows for corruption, oppression, and the erosion of democratic principles. But we also know that power can be checked, that accountability can be restored, and that democracy can thrive when the right safeguards are in place. It is the responsibility of every generation to protect these safeguards, to ensure that power is held in check, and to remember that the true strength of leadership lies not in the accumulation of power, but in the ability to wield it responsibly for the benefit of all. Balancing responsibility and power is the linchpin of effective political leadership, as it ensures that leaders prioritize the public interest while wielding authority. When leaders strike this balance, they demonstrate accountability, transparency, and integrity, fostering trust and credibility with their constituents. Effective governance is the natural outcome, as leaders make informed decisions that benefit the greater good. On the other hand, an imbalance can have disastrous consequences, including the abuse of authority, neglect of public welfare, and erosion of trust. To achieve this delicate balance, leaders must establish robust checks and balances, promote transparency, and encourage citizen engagement. Additionally, developing emotional intelligence is crucial, enabling leaders to empathize with diverse perspectives and make decisions that benefit all stakeholders. By embracing these strategies, leaders can harmonize responsibility and power, creating a thriving democratic system that serves the people. In conclusion, balancing responsibility and power is not only a moral imperative, but also a practical necessity for successful political leadership. By prioritizing accountability, transparency, and integrity, leaders can build trust, promote effective governance, and ensure that their authority serves the greater good.